This is Rebel Mom Boss, the podcast for scrappy, rebellious moms who are making things happen while raising their babies. My name is Robyn Flynn, a scrappy, rebellious mom myself, and the founder and managing director of Robyn Flynn Media. I'm also a mom to a beautiful toddler named Peyton. We do things a little bit differently here, so buckle up and welcome to the rebellion. Before I started my business, I worked in radio for over 10 years, and that all started with an internship at an all-sports radio station, which back then was called Team 990. Sports radio had always been, and largely remains, a male-dominated industry. But there was one local woman's voice that I listened to and looked up to, and ultimately she inspired me to take a chance and go for it. And that woman was Andie Bennett. You see, being a woman in sports is not for the faint of heart. You have to have a thick skin, thicker than you would ever even imagine. And Andie is one of the toughest chicks I know. She's also a mom and an all-around badass, and I am so excited to have her on Rebel Mom Boss. Welcome to the rebellion, Andie.
Thank you so much. What a lovely intro. I really appreciate you saying that. I'm not sure I agree with all of it, but I don't feel like I have a thick skin. I'm always told I'm too sensitive. So but you're not wrong. It is an industry that you've had to sort of develop that shell over the years, or at least try to.
Which is harder than it sounds, I think. I don't know. How often have you been told just ignore the trolls?
Oh gosh, I still get told that all the time, even though we have made some progress, we've made some segue with that, but that is one of the things I struggle with because I understand the importance of social media in this business. I really, truly do. But, coming back to what I was saying before, I'm a sensitive person. So it kind of became tough for me when it was really bad online. I especially early in my career experienced kind of a targeted attack on me from one specific person who actually was another woman, which was also just made it really upsetting. But it got a lot of people on board in targeting me on social media, and it was really, really tough. And, over the years, I don't engage that much on social media because I don't have the time or energy to sort through all the negative to see the positive. And I'm still like that. I'm not on there. I haven't grown my audience. I sometimes kick myself over the years because I'm like, wow, I should have done more. I could have had a better social media following by now if I'd really tried, but it was a very conscious decision not to. So that leaves me where I'm at now, where I've been in this business for 20 years and I should have a way bigger following than I do. But, you make those choices, right? It's just not something that I was able to deal with on a day-to-day basis.
And I don't think it's a necessity, right? Because you do have a platform by being on the radio, by being at TSN 690. You were at CBC for years as well before that. People respect you in this industry, and you don't need to be on Twitter for that,
I hope so, because I have always done my job with that in mind. I always wanted to either help people coming behind me or really try and emulate the mentors that I had that I really respected, and I've always tried to treat people with respect, regardless of where they were, if they were an intern, or if they were somebody really above me. I have always tried to operate like that and think somebody who's your intern could be your boss in a few years, which is in this business is not out of the realm of possibility. There of course is that self-serving side of it as well, but I have always tried to operate in a respectful way with everyone I come into contact with and help as much as I could, which sometimes has been not great for me personally, because I think you can understand, especially as a woman in this business, you're always trying to go above and beyond because you're always trying to show that you belong there and that you bring value to the conversation and that you are not like I've been talked to on the text line, a DEI hire, you know what I mean? It's so in that way, it's really tough because you could kill yourself for this job and work, as I did, hours and hours of unpaid overtime, and yet people are always certain people are always going to look at it that you got there for another reason, you're there because you're the token woman, or you're there for, and it's but what about all the hours of research and games and things I worked and every practice I was at and every, all the background work I did and all of the ways I tried to like show and bring stories to the fore that I thought were important, that was championing, some players that didn't get a lot of attention or female athletes or whatever the case may be. It's like, it seems like as a woman sometimes in all industries, your hard work gets sometimes like, it's not considered. So
yep.
that can be really frustrating, I think. But I think that may be true in a lot of different jobs.
For sure. How did you get your start? Because for me, like, I always loved sports as a kid. I was in a school where that was weird, to be the girl that liked sports. Like, the other girls didn't really like sports. So a lot of my friends were guys. So naturally, we just sort of all hung out and played hockey and watched hockey together and watched football and stuff like that. But as I became like a young adult and I got really into listening to sports radio and, thinking, hey, maybe I want to do this, I found you. And it was really a huge inspiration for me because before you, I really hadn't seen many women doing that in radio. Like on TV, you always had those, the token woman sideline reporter. But to have a woman who was like giving her opinion, that was like bombastic to me. It was, huge. So I'm curious who you looked up to.
Honestly, there really wasn't like a specific radio person that I looked up to, mainly because I just wasn't a big consumer of talk radio at that time. Like, I wanted to be a sound editor. Like, I wanted to be a sound editor or a Foley artist. Like, my passion was in sound. And that was what I really fell in love with in school. And I had always been an athlete. Like, through my life, I had always loved sports. Like, I would have loved it regardless, but I moved a lot growing up. And for me, it was a way where I always had a way to integrate and make friends. So that was, and then I fell in love with softball, and I became like, that was really a huge part of my life for many, many years. And because I was a bit of like a dorky kid and like always moving and stuff like that, for me, because I was always a natural at sports and athletics and stuff, it came easy to me. So I loved that feeling of being on a field where I felt confident and people looked to me. And, I was very like, it's a lot of my personality now. It's like I like bringing people in. I liked being the leader on my team. I really enjoyed that. So that was really where the passion for it started for me, and just having that idea where it didn't matter where I moved to, I knew I would be able to like jump into a team somewhere, and you always have that sports as like a unifier. And it's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about sport, because I still do see the positive sides of that, especially for young women and girls. But no, I was into sound editing, and I had been applying at a bunch of different radio stations, and I lived right down the street from TSN 690, and they offered, I don't even know how I wound up interning there, but I was interning somehow on the morning show. I started interning there with that was back with I think P-Card was the host, from P-On Sports. Tony was on the morning show at that time, so that was a whole experience. And yeah, I kind of got into it by interning, and then I've had very good timing throughout my career, so that's something as well. Like Kathy was on with Mitch, and I think about a year after I'd been interning, for free, by the way. This is back in the day when interns were not paid, so this is a lot of time waking up in the morning. But I loved it. Kathy left, and then I had an audition tape floating around there, and Scott Saxon, who was our sort of producer of writing commercials and stuff like that, and we had become friends. He gave my tape to Mitch and said, look, she's interning on the morning show, there might be something here, maybe it would be a good fit. And then I just met Mitch, and it was very good chemistry. We've always had really great on-air chemistry together, and he was pretty, I don't want to say scary person back then, because he just was an intimidating person back then, and times were different, there was very, things would happen in a radio studio that probably wouldn't happen now, and so Mitch was kind of known around the building as a kind of you just got to get it right with him, otherwise he will let you know. And I wasn't scared of that. So we had a fun banter back and forth, and I was able to give it back a little bit of you know, that kind of jabbing back and forth. Like I kind of grew up with that. Like my dad was a little bit like that. He was a quiet man, but he really liked to like get his zinger in when he could. And yeah, I think you have to be like that with somebody who has a strong personality like Mitch, and you have to be able to joke around with him a little bit to lighten the mood sometimes. So we had a very good interaction that way. And then I became very interested in talk radio and sports radio and all those things. But I mean, to this day, I still enjoy playing sports more than I enjoy watching sports. Like I do, especially now that I'm a mom, I have a real hard time sitting down and watching like a full game. Like I need to be doing something else. Like there has to be something else happening.
Well, that's where you and I are different, because I would much rather sit down and watch sports than play them at this stage of my life, for sure. I love that you brought up Mitch, because I feel like Mitch Melnick has always been such a champion, not just for women in sports, but for women's sports as well. And when I first started, I also interned for free on the morning show, except it was Elliot Price, Denis Cassavant, and Sean Starr when I did it.
Okay.
But I remember a bunch of the guys at the station were like psyching me up about the first time I was going to work with Mitch. Like, he's really scary. You know, he's going to jump on you. And I was terrified, right? So like I came into that first shift with him. I had so many notes. I was so over prepared. Yeah. And like he was basically like, throw that in the garbage. Like, get rid of that. He didn't want that. But he has always been super encouraging of me for everything that I've ever done. And I've always loved and respected the attention that he gives to women's sports as well, especially before it was cool, right? Like women's hockey is having a moment right now, which is amazing. But when it wasn't, when it was 500 fans at Etienne Desmarteaux Arena in the East End, and I was out there, you know, slaving away, he would still throw me on the air to talk about women's hockey. And mad respect for that. So,
absolutely.
Do you remember your first professional locker room that you entered? Like, did you start with CFL or a smaller event before you worked your way up to, like, the big leagues and the Habs?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think it was Alouettes, actually. I think it probably was my first one. I don't really remember, to be honest, but I do think that it started with Alouettes and Impact, and then I had a little bit, which is kind of funny because like an Alouettes locker room is like not where you want to be as a woman for your first, like it's just very different. Like it's very different. You know, I think people don't understand that like the Canadians locker room, it's like totally separated. You know what I mean? Like where we go in, and I mean, you know this, I'm not saying this for you, but like they're pretty much like dressed, they're in their equipment, you know, they have a shirt off or whatever, but like where they're getting showered and stuff like that, it's like behind, you know? And Alouette's locker room, I mean, you are just like, it's like eyes up, ladies. Like it's, you know, that was my whole, I mean, truly, you are in a locker room with a bunch of very large, half naked men that really don't give a flying whatever that you're there, and they shouldn't. Like this is their space. I've always very much understood that. But it is, you know, I'm not going to lie, it's intimidating to go in there because you're just like, oh my God, okay, what am I doing? And like, just making sure I don't get caught in some awkward scenario here, and be professional and do your job. And, you know, so at first it took a minute, but not that long to adjust. You know what I mean? Like, that's why I find it funny when you have these discussions with men sometimes where there's like, well, we could have gone in a locker room, and it's like, well, there's a reason for that, you know what I mean? And that's kind of on you, like that you know. So it's just I do find that funny when they're like, what do you do in the locker room? I'm like, I be professional and I do my job, and I just don't cast my eyes around in any kind of weird, creepy way. Like I just don't see what is complicated about that. But you know, here we are. It's still probably the main question that I do get mostly from men who are just like, well, how do you go into a man's locker room? It's like, it's not that big a deal, man.
I think that's probably why I have such clear memories, because people have always been asking me about them. So I've like retold these stories a million times. Like the first time I actually got asked to cover a Habs game, Rod Francis asked me, and I think he thought I'd already done it before. Okay. Because he was like, oh, can you do the Penguins locker room tonight? Like super casually. And I was like, yeah, no problem. Because Sean Starr had always told me, act like you've been there before.
100%.
Say yes. Figure it out. So I was like, absolutely, I'll do it. And then I like called Jess Rusnak panicking. Like, I don't even know where the visitors locker room is. Like, what do I do? And she was like, I'm going to be at the game. Don't worry. I'll show you where to go. Like, she was awesome. And that's one thing I loved about Montreal media was that the women all kind of had this like secret club. I guess, you know, where you like, you kind of nodded at each other. And even if you weren't friends, whether it was French or English, like the women have always sort of had each other's backs. And I really, really, really love that.
Yeah,
Has it always been like that?
I mean, to be honest, when I started, it was only Chantal who was in there from RDS. Like, that's the only other woman that was around. And she's definitely one of the ones where I like kind of like tried to follow her lead a lot of the time. But, you know, I have to give some of the men I've worked with over the years a lot of credit, too, because I've had so many men that have, like, taken me under their wing or been, like, you know, just given me tips or, you know, somebody that I've followed, because that's another thing we don't talk about, is that, like, these basements are confusing sometimes. It's like having to find a visitor's locker room, especially in another arena. It's like, we need to talk about that stress for a hot minute, because that used to really make me nervous. That
the ACC is the worst. I've gotten lost in the bowels of the ACC more times than I can count.
You know, you're like, where am I going? And here's the thing where I think it's very different for women, is that, like, whenever I was in those scenarios where I'm like, I didn't know where I was going, wasn't really sure what I was doing, didn't have enough background at the time to be doing what I'm doing, I was so stressed out about that, because I felt like if I don't get this right, the response is like, women are dumb, women don't belong here, women whatever. And I was just thinking, it's so interesting that men don't have that fear. You know what I mean? Like, if they get it wrong, and still to this day I feel like this on the air, it bugs me sometimes, because, like, if the guys get something wrong on the air, it's like, oh, he just made a mistake, let's move on, and the conversation continues on. If I make a mistake on the air, or if I make a mistake, I can't find where I'm going, I get lost in a building, whatever, it's so much heavier, I feel like, for women. And it's like you're speaking for all women all the time when you're in a male-dominated environment, and when you make mistakes, and I'm not saying mistakes are okay. I'm not saying that, like, I shouldn't be held accountable for my mistakes. I just feel that it's so outwardly and inwardly in my own mind, it's so much bigger than just like, oh, she made a mistake. It's like, she's an idiot, she doesn't belong, you know? So that's the part where I feel like for us in sports, it carries a little bit more weight. And again, it's gotten better, but, you know, I still receive very different messages if I screw up than some of my male counterparts do.
I get that. So you spent a lot of time in the Habs locker room.
Yes.
Whereas I mainly would work in the visitors' locker room when I was at the sports station.
Right.
And I loved it because the Habs locker room is like a zoo. There's like 100 reporters there. They're all really, really tall, and I'm short. So, like, you're fighting to get your arm in there to get the mic in. Whereas the visitors' locker room, there was, like, if it was, you know, Arizona or something where they didn't have a ton of media traveling with them, sometimes you would have a one-on-one with these players.
Yeah.
Which was so cool. I loved that opportunity to be able to ask multiple questions and, like, practice my skills. But it was also scary because in the Habs locker room, all their names are hanging. So if you didn't know who a player was, you could just look at their stall and be like, oh, that's Cristobal Huet or whatever.
Yeah.
But in the visitors' room, there's no names hanging there. So you had to know them all by face. So what would happen a lot of the time, I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I don't do this anymore, so nobody cares. I would record the interview and I would title it on my device as like guy with blue eyes and long brown hair.
100%.
And then I would go back to my laptop and I would look at the roster photos and try and figure out who I just spoke to and go from there. But I was so embarrassed, I wouldn't ask somebody like, who was that? Until I noticed other people asking me.
Yeah.
And they would be like, oh, who was that you were just talking to? And then I was like, oh, okay, I'm not the only person who doesn't know who every single NHL player is by face.
It's crazy because it's an unrealistic thing to ask, right? Like to for people to know everyone. But I was exactly the same way. Like, I can't tell you how many recordings I had from, because I used to do both. Like, I used to run from Canadians to visitors, and it was one of those things that would stress me out because I'm like, oh my god, they're not gonna have their names, I'm not gonna know, what if it's an important guy and I can't recognize him? Because even if you know somebody, after a game, like, they're sweaty, their faces are red, they don't always look like what you like have seen them look like. So I have so many recordings where I would be like, I think he might be number 35. I saw a hat with a number 34. Like, I would try and give myself as many clues as possible to figure out who I had been speaking with. So, yeah, you're not alone on that. But it's funny that you mentioned the height thing because Mitch and I were just talking about this week. I don't know how we got in this conversation of dressing in the press box. And it was actually John who was worried about what he was wearing. And I said, back in the day when I was up there a lot, I actually did, like, my outfits were very well thought out, and I always wore very big heels because I was a smaller person and I wanted to be up a bit higher, and I always was trying to dress like so I felt powerful. And Mitch kind of was like, really? He was like, oh, I'd never thought about that. I was like, listen, this is something that women, we do regularly. I'm not sure if men do this as well. I'm only speaking for myself or for this particular woman, but for me, I very much need to feel good in what I'm wearing so that I feel confident and powerful in a scenario. And the height thing was a huge thing back then. So, I mean, I still think I've ruined my feet to this day from like the amount of like I said, I used to haul in like 4-inch heels from like the Canadians room to the visitors room, and then back to try and get to the coach in time. Like, I was just like running through the basement of the Bell Center. So it was, it's fun times when I think about it now, but it was hard. It was hard work at the time.
It's hard too, and when you're young, because this was sort of my first radio job, my first real big girl job, that wasn't like working in a call center or McDonald's or something. And, all of a sudden you're like running down the hallway and like, oh, there's Jean Beliveau. Or,
yes.
You'd be passing these people and like, you don't have time to stop and say hi. Like when Jean Beliveau passed away, I had never formally met him, but I'd probably seen him a million times. And like, I was regretting it. Like, oh man, I wish I had stopped. But I was like, I didn't have time to stop and chat with him. Like that just wasn't possible. I think a lot of people don't understand what it is actually like on a game day.
No,
from, getting there, getting all the way up to the press box a million miles in the sky and trying not to drop anything. You have to go to the room where the hot dogs are at intermission so that you can sort of shoot the shit with the guys, because that's how you're going to get ahead, is by making friends. And you gotta, when the game is over, you're not still sitting in your seat. You're already standing near the door for the elevator, probably watching the last few minutes on the TV in the elevator on your way down to the press box, which is not glamorous. You're running around. You don't have time for anything. And if the game doesn't go well, crazy things can happen. I remember almost having my head taken off by a Gatorade bottle by a member of the Ottawa Senators after the Habs came back, and it was a crazy game. And I whipped a bottle in anger. He wasn't aiming for me, obviously, but scary. So what are some of the craziest moments that you've ever encountered?
Oh my God. Like a post-game stuff, or just like any...
Anything. Like it could be an interview on the air.
Gosh, the craziest stuff.
I mean, you talk to Bill Lee all the time, so that was... He said some crazy things.
Yeah, Bill, you never really know where Bill is going to go, so that is... you kind of just got to be on your toes for that. I don't know. It's all such a blur now. Like, there was so much... it is so hectic, and you just have to be ready for... anything, and the problem is that you're usually on some kind of deadline. So it's all nice to say that like you roll with the punches, but you're also trying to make sure you get everything into people who need it by a certain broadcast time. So I don't know. I'm gonna need a few minutes to marinate on that one, but there's been a lot of crazy things. Like the craziest I think was when I was the few years that I was able to travel with CBC and do some playoff games, because that was just wild. I mean, that was like, again, what we do is a ton of fun. I'm not going to say that it's not fun. I'm so like blessed and grateful to have had that time, but I don't think the other thing people don't get is like when you work stuff like that, when you work a playoffs, it is like 5 a.m. until probably well after 1 a.m. that you are working, like you are either writing stories, you're gathering, you got to get to a practice, you got to gather after the practice, you have to put stories together after practice. By the time you finish that, practically it's game time, and then so it's, yeah, I've had a lot of wonderful experiences over the years, but there's been a few crazy ones. Well, I'll tell this one. I won't say who it is, but most people will know because I think I have told this story on the air. But there's this one Canadiens player that was like just a bit bordering on inappropriate and in some of his comments. And one day I was in the locker room, and he kept walking completely naked through my eye line, like from the back, where they're like showering back there and stuff. So like it could only have been done on purpose because I had never seen that before, you know? And it happened like 3 or 4 times. I kept seeing out of the corner of my eye. I was like, did he just walk by again? Like just completely nude? And then there was a somewhat awkward conversation outside in the in the hallway afterwards. And I just remember leaving there being like, what an absolute minefield this is for women sometimes, you know, because everyone assumes that you are there to hook up with players or meet players or whatever it is, you know, like that's been said to me like hundreds and hundreds of times. And I'm like, it's so bizarre because that's not at all the vibe, you know, like, so when that happened to me, I really was sort of like a bit shell-shocked, and then I was leaving and I was just like, wow, if I had made some different decisions here, this really could have been very bad for my career, for everything, you know. And it just, I don't know, I just remember it has always stuck with me, that experience of like, I guess just wondering what I could have done differently to not have it happen. You know, I was like, did I get this impression that I was not like on the up and up, and that, you know, so it's funny, like obviously now that I'm older, I think about it differently, and it's like, you did nothing. I did not bring that on myself, you know. But yeah, it was probably one of the craziest things that have happened to me as a reporter, and one I'm happy did not happen again.
Yeah, look, I'm glad too. You mentioned the playoffs and like those crazy long days, 5 a.m. to 1 a.m. And right away I'm thinking like, how would you do that if you have kids? Because the thing that's crazy though is there are plenty of men who do this, who have kids and travel with the teams. The play-by-play guys are literally all guys, and they've all got kids, and they do it because they've got a wife at home taking care of the kids. But it doesn't work that way for us. You're a mom. You couldn't do something like that anymore.
No.
Or could you?
I mean, listen, everybody's scenario is different, and you need a supportive other partner to do that. So if that's like, you know, if you're a woman and you have a husband that is a stay-at-home husband, and you can have that freedom, then that's fantastic. But like, let's be honest, that's not the dynamic for most people, and certainly not for most women. So I even, like, when I took my maternity leave, I mean, I don't want to start rambling about this, but I had probably been working at burnout for a long time when I got pregnant. So when I got pregnant, I had a lot of complication thingies start happening, and part of it was probably a lot to do with the fact that I was at burnout, basically, and trying to keep working. So I eventually had to get put, I went early on maternity leave because my doctor said that I had to, which is a whole other thing. It's like, you know, my work they wanted proof that either me or the baby were in immediate danger. And my doctor was like, we're kind of trying to avoid that scenario. You know what I mean? Like, we don't want either one of you to die. So it was just another thing that I think like women have to deal with that is just ridiculous to me, where I'm like, my doctor told me to stop working. Like, that should be enough, you know? Mm-hmm. So I had to stop working. You know, probably at like, I don't even remember now, it might have been like 5 months pregnant or 6 months pregnant. And I still thought I would be able to go back and work afterwards. And then I had my child, and it became abundantly clear that was not going to be possible for me, because I was just thinking, like, I was still in the mentality of working the hours that I had always worked. And at this point, I'd been on morning radio for a long time. And, you know, I'm just not the kind of person that I was never a filling out an hours timesheet. You know what I mean? And again, regret it now sometimes a little bit, but I've just never been that kind of employee. Like, I do my job until the job is done, and you pay me what you pay me, you know? So I was just thinking, like, oh my God, I'm working morning radio. I often like do fit in a nap in the day at some point, but I'm always running to either cover some story that I find is interesting in the afternoon, or going back to a game, covering the game, working the game, going home, sleeping 4 hours, and then going in to do the morning show the next day. That was my routine, you know? So I was like, well, I definitely am not going to be able to do that. But now that's what they expect in this role. So how am I going to go back to working a morning show, but then being like, as soon as my morning show is done, that's it, I'm done. You know, I'm going home because I have a child at home. So I knew I couldn't do the job that way for me. You know, it just wouldn't work for me. Like I loved what I was doing in the afternoons. I loved covering like either smaller stories or like creating these fun ways to get into communities through sport. Like I was very proud of that work that I did at CBC, but it was not realistic to think that I was going to continue doing that. So I essentially left like a very secure permanent job at CBC, which were quite rare at that time. Because I knew I wasn't going to be able to go back and work those hours. And I was still, like I said, when I went on maternity leave, I'm pretty sure I was at burnout, or like not, which I didn't think was a real thing until I like stopped working, and then everything like fell apart in my body. So yeah, I was sad because I was like, you know what, I'm going to have to leave this job because there's no possible way that I can do this as a working mother. And then I also was starting to realize that, you know, it was going to be a bit more intense than I had expected being a parent because, you know, my kid's autistic. I did not know that at the time, but there definitely were signs early on. So I had a really hard first couple years, you know, so I was definitely... I knew I wouldn't, or very early, that I wouldn't be able to go back and work those hours. So I did have to quit my job, and I went into a part-time job for like a few years until my kid was 5. And then Mitch had called me up, and I'd had conversations with the program director over the years, and which I really appreciated. Like, he kept checking in, and I kept being like, I just don't see how it's possible. Like, at that point, I was like, I don't understand how anybody has kids and works. Like, I just feel like it's this notion, especially for women, that you can have it all, and maybe some people can, and that's great. But I think it's pretty destructive to push that narrative all the time, because for most of us, it's quite impossible to even have half of it. You know what I mean? Like, never mind this push to be like this Wonder Woman who can somehow work a full-time job and then also be what their child needs and keep your household in order, you know? Like, it's, you know, I feel like it's a bit cliche at this point, but it really is. It's just a lot of work. It's just, there's no way around it. It's a lot of work to be a mom.
It is. You have to find help somehow, right? So, like in my case, my husband and I were always fighting over who was going to clean what, who was in charge of what. You didn't do the dishes. Like, that was the main argument we were having. So we finally sat down and we're like, this is stupid. We're fighting over one thing. Mm-hmm. We're going to put money in our budget. We're going to cancel XYZ streaming service, and we're going to hire a cleaning lady. And we now have somebody who comes in once a week, and I never have to think about it. We don't fight anymore, which is amazing. But I have, you know, experienced, not shame, but like, I feel like people kind of judge me a little bit. Like, well, you can't keep your own house clean. Like, you know, and I'm like, okay, but I'm also running a business, and I have a toddler, and toddlers, even if you have the best kid on the planet, are going to throw you for a loop. They're crazy. Yeah. I call mine a little three-nager or a tyrant. She gets one or the other. But, you know, you got to work somehow. You've got to pay the bills. You've got to be a good mom. We put so much pressure on ourselves. If you have a child that has special needs of any degree, like Peyton had torticollis when she was an infant. So like the muscles on one side of her neck were like tight. They were like tense and stuck. So she had like, her head was kind of stuck to the side. And people always thought it was just kind of cute. Like, oh, you know, she looks adorable. But what ended up happening was she couldn't hold up her own head because of it. So it delayed all of her major milestones. So she sat later, she crawled later, and she only started walking. She was like almost 2.5 when she started walking, which meant osteo appointments, physiotherapy appointments, neurosurgeon appointments. How would I have gone back to my old job? I would have had no vacation time. I would have just been spending all my time off going to appointments with my kids, which is no wonder that we're all close to burning out. Like something... it's wonderful that we live in Canada and have parental leave, because when I look at women in the US, I don't know how they have children ever.
I don't know.
but there's not enough still, I would say. And I like feel bad complaining. I have subsidized daycare. I had a year paid leave. I have a partner who is an active participant in parenting. I live 6 doors down from my dad who can babysit for free all the time. And I still find it hard. So, I don't know how, moms are working high power jobs and raising kids and keeping their houses clean. Like, what I need to know their secret is always how I feel.
I don't know. I'm clinging to this belief that that is just a social media perception. Like they're doing it all. I'm like, they just can't be. They just cannot be. Like there's not enough hours in the day, and it's so true what you're saying about the appointments, and that was true for us as well. Especially because once we realized that there was something going on with Finn, my son, it was, that's like a 2-year diagnostic process for autism. It's funny because it's another thing that people don't have a good understanding of, but enjoy speaking on. It's like, oh, everyone's autistic these days. It's like, I didn't just make it up. You know what I mean? It's like, we went to this was like so many doctors, so many forms, so many things. And, and it is extremely time consuming. And again, perhaps not the dynamic for everyone, but a lot of these things often fall on the mom, often fall on the woman. And the mental load that I think what I find frustrating the most now is that men are becoming a bit more familiar with this terminology, but they don't really acknowledge it or believe it, I think, for the most part. And that's infuriating because it's like, not only are we shouldering most of the domestic upkeep and the mental load of what kids need, doctor's appointments, dentist appointments, teachers' names, keeping on top of ped days, keeping on top of what they need for school, keeping on top of what's coming up this week. Not only are we doing all that, but that work is in many households not acknowledged, and in many workplaces not acknowledged. So even me, I feel like I'm not sure if it's just my perception, but there's offhand jokes sometimes, if I have to take a day when my kid is sick, or if there's a ped day that kind of sneaks up on me and I'm bringing my kid to work, I guess, I've been off a few times when Finn was sick and been asked basically the next day, it's oh, did you enjoy your day off? And it's it's stuff like that where it's guys, I haven't had a day off since 2017. You know what I mean? It's when you get days off, you are off. You don't have somebody literally coughing directly into your mouth at 5:30 in the morning. So we are not living the same experience here. So sometimes I do wish that was a little bit more understood in the workplace. It's they people say that they're oh, we get it, you're a working mom, but it's boots on the ground. I feel like there's not a lot of there's not really a lot that they get.
I think part of it too is that we're afraid to talk about it because we don't want them to think that we can't do our job as well as they can, that we're distracted but we are. 1 week a month, we're all in agonizing pain, doubled over at our desks trying to keep working and popping Midol, Our male colleagues don't have to deal with that. No. And, I'm looking at countries that have paid menstrual leave every month. And I think that's just brilliant. Yeah. And I was talking to my husband about it and he was like, well, then you'd have to give guys some sort of leave to make it equal. I'm like, but you don't bleed. Yeah. So it will never be equal. You don't need that time. Yeah. I don't understand. But I feel like we're scared to have that conversation because we don't want to put ourselves at a disadvantage. Because I feel like maybe the women before us, the more, the late boomers, early Gen Xers, they really set that example of women can be like men, women can be bosses, women can have it all. And it's just not sustainable. And it's sort of the next generation, the younger Gen Xers, the millennials, the Gen Zs who are no, thank you. We can't do this anymore. I think, honestly, when I quit my job, I was shocked because I thought I was for sure going to go back afterwards. And I was like, wait a minute. I have to find a daycare that's open after 6 p.m. The only daycares that exist open past 6 p.m. are for doctors and lawyers. And spoiler alert, you don't get doctor lawyer money when you work in radio. Yeah. So it wasn't really an option. But I just wish, I don't know how to frame what I'm thinking, but I just wish there were more support.
Yes.
And that we could say what's going on without worrying that it's going to hurt our careers long term.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like, I think we're just so used to just getting on with it as women, like whether you're in pain, whether you are like, bleeding out from, whatever is going on in your cycle, like you're just expected to not just get on with it, but get on with it with a smile on your face. And that, it's infuriating because I feel like we are looked at as, even though we work so much harder, and I'm sorry, but like I've worked with men and I've worked with women, and I once had an editor tell me that he liked hiring women because they worked twice as hard and you didn't have to pay them as much. And I was like, again, this has changed, but they know this is what's going on, that a woman is going to kill herself to get the job done. And some men do too. I'm not saying that they don't. I'm just saying that like for our mentality, we're so worried about people thinking that we're using something as an excuse, that we're not tough enough to get the job done, that we are not worth the hire or the time or the accommodations that would have to happen. So that's all circling around in there as well, So I just, that pressure is very real, and it's maddening because when you do become a parent, priorities shift, and I don't want to be one of those people who's like, what I'm doing is the most important thing in the world, but it kind of is. Like, I'm sorry, like you're raising a person, you're trying to raise the people that are going to be leading the world beyond us. And like, we're not leaving them a great world to begin with. So like, I would like for them to be on as best footing as possible. So, obviously my child is my number one priority, but you're at odds with it, right? So it's like, even though he is my first priority, I feel like I'm failing him all the time. And I feel like I'm failing my work all the time because I can't watch 2 games a night. Sometimes I can't even watch 1 game a night. Sometimes I have to be doing catch up in the morning watching highlights. And the guys are like, you didn't watch this game? Like, how could you not have watched it? And it's like, well, Like, do I really want to launch into what happened in my house last night and the meltdown that I had to deal with and the fact that I had to like clean poop off of this, that, and the other? Like, nobody wants to hear that. But it's the reality of what's happening, and it's the reality of what goes on when you have any kid, but especially when you have a kid with, a differently abled kid or somebody with special needs, which is my situation. Like, things are not always smooth, like sometimes I'm going into work and I feel like I've just fought a freaking war from like 4:45 in the morning, you know what I mean? And these guys get to come in and it's just a different scenario. So it's frustrating because I don't think there is enough support, and I think we are still expected to just like do it all with a smile, and you can't always be that person, It's like we're human beings. Like when my patience level is like this thin because I've been dealing with a child that won't do literally anything, like won't get dressed, won't eat his food, won't brush his teeth, and I still have to get him to school by 8:00. Like it sounds like, they're silly little things, but when it's a day-to-day battle like that, and then you're like, you drop them off at school and you get home and you're like, oh my God. And then it's like, you look at the clock and it's like, I gotta be in the freaking car to go to work in like half an hour, So it's just, again, even as I'm saying it, I feel like it's like, oh, poor me, and we don't want to have that energy. But again, this whole having it all thing, there's a reason why they used to say you need a village. It takes a village to raise a child, and we don't have the village anymore. Like, you're lucky you have family nearby, you have a grandparent that can step in. Like, a lot of people don't have any village at all, like, yep. I have great friends, but they're all buried under the same mountain that I'm buried under. They can't help me out. I mean, they try, they do their best, but so yeah, it's a tough, I do find it a very tough balance.
Yeah. And I know, like, I still get messages from, young women who are just starting at Concordia's journalism school, and they'll message me and ask me for advice. And I'm sure you get it all the time. And I'm always nervous to give advice because, like, my instinct is like, don't do it.
Run away!
Exactly. But I'm like, I don't want to say that. That's not very helpful. But I'm curious what sort of advice you have for women who are just starting out now.
I would say like go where your passion leads you and do the stories that you want to do and fight for them. Look, it's a great industry. I love what I do. Like I truly, I think journalism itself is very important. Like not that I do investigative journalism or any type of like serious journalism, but I do take pride in what I do. And I do think it's a great industry to be in, man or woman. But for young people, I would say, you know, be good at setting boundaries, for sure, which again, I watch these kids today, like Gen Z or Gen Alpha or whatever they are, and I am continuously impressed with the way that they handle themselves again, it's like, it's nice because it's like, you're not having to like educate these young men the way that we kind of have to educate men sort of our age and older. Like they get it, which makes it a lot easier for the women because it's a totally different, you know, the woke culture that some people think is so bad, I think is so amazing and wonderful and inspiring. And I love seeing these kids set boundaries and be like, you can't talk to me that way. And like, just be like, that's what I would say, especially to young women. It's like, do not sacrifice your comfort for a man to feel comfortable. And I wish that had been told to me a long time ago, because I think I spent a lot of time being very, very uncomfortable and feeling very uncomfortable and feeling very unsafe in situations in order to not make the men that I was with uncomfortable. And so that would be the thing I would say is like, worry about yourself and follow your intuition. If something feels off, just get out of there. And as far as like the work, follow your passion. Like if you're passionate about it, listeners will hear that and they will connect with you. And that's always been like, I have gotten that feedback. It's been my favorite feedback that I've gotten over the years is people who are like, I didn't even care about this stuff, but you make it fun to listen to, you know? And that makes me happy because I think there's a little bit too much gatekeeping in sports, especially. And I wish people would understand that it's like, there's room for everyone, you know, like you don't have to be able to name the like starting lineup to be able to enjoy a baseball game. You know what I mean? Like you don't have to be able to know every member of the O-line to watch a football game. Like, and I think that's a lot of ways that people, and especially women, get sort of like pushed outside of being a sports fan because they're like, but I don't know. And it's like, the guys don't know either. Like, just spoiler alert, like they don't know all these players' names either. You know what I mean? And they don't even know all the rules half the time. And they still are able to enjoy it. So, yeah, that's probably what I would say. Like, follow your passion, make your comfort the number one priority, and like, you know, just try and bring people in instead of shutting them out.
I love that. Absolutely love that. You can catch Andie Bennett on TSN 690 weekday afternoons. Is it from 3 to 7 p.m. the show still?
Now we're from 2 to 6.
2 to 6. Love
Yes.
that. 2 to 6 p.m. on TSN 690 in Montreal. Thank you so much for being here, Andie. It was a lot of fun.